record it too, because she didn't want to miss. And we'll end up retreading a little bit, because the creed is a little long.
Oh, we're on the creed now?
Yeah.
We're done with commandments already?
We're never done with the commandments, but
Well,
I understand what you mean. Yeah, for now, yeah. Remember, just basic principle of that the commandments are given for 3 reasons. Actually, I don't know if we covered this last week, but I think we did. We borrowed this from our Reformed friends, but there's generally 3 ways the Holy Spirit uses the law or the commands. As one as a mirror is 2. Good. Curb is 1. And what was the 3rd? Do you remember? I think I learned it as guide. Is that what you learned? Curb, mirror, guide?
Oh, I don't remember.
Right. This is the more controversial one. Doesn't need to be, but it can be. Sometimes the first use is called the civil use. The mirror is called the theological use. And then, depending on who you ask, the guide can be the pedagogy.
Oh, it's a rule. That's
rule. Okay, that's good.
But, like a ruler helps guide a straight line.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So that sounds complicated. It's really not. It's that, like, we'll just take one of them. Honor your father and your mother. Generally speaking, most societies have had that as a civil law. That they protect marriage and family. Although our society seems to have lost sight of that. And the question is why? Why deregulate the family? Put children in abusive, keep children in abusive, or actually encourage parents to abuse their children, with like all sorts of bad ideas or mutilation or whatever. It's because the family is a constitutive element of all society. So if you undermine the family, you can undermine society. If you undermine society, then you can take over. That's basically. Because it's really, mothers and fathers defending their children is the last bulwark from any kind of tyranny. So generally speaking, even the 4th commandment has been enshrined in law, that we protected marriage and family. Generally, in our country, until 50 years ago, you couldn't just divorce somebody without fault. There had to actually be, then they created no-fault divorce, which just allowed people to enter freely and out of marriage, which hurts children. Generally speaking, there's cause for divorce, but we're talking about, people just casually going in and out, and of course that ultimately undermined marriage entirely. Then why even get married, if you can just go in and out?
Well, that's kind of a rare. No.
Right, and that people did take matters into their own hands, and they said, no, we're going to have things like prenuptials, to try to make it at least cost prohibitive to divorce, which doesn't seem like a great way to start your marriage, but. I understand if the government's not going to protect your marriage, then anyway. And family courts are some of the ugliest places to go, anyway. But they're there, the things that you hear and see. Mirror. This is what we call the chief use. So it's worth reiterating that. So the chief use of the law. We talked a lot about this last time. Is to show us our sin. This is why the law was given. Why give the law after they'd already been in Egypt for 400 years. It's thousands of years after Adam and Eve, right? Or close to maybe 2,000 or 1,500, depending on how you want to date things. So they give the law, God gives the law to show us where we've gone, right? And he's done it in other ways too. We talked about the flood, I think, as being like an indication that he even says it, all mankind was exceedingly wicked or evil. Their thoughts were on evil constantly. Like, whoa, okay. So then he destroys it. And then guide is the one, this is sometimes called the Christian use as well. I like that. And that, again, the Holy Spirit takes the law and he applies it to the life of the Christian to demonstrate what good fruit looks like. Being made a Christian, then not only do you not break your marriage, right? But now by the Spirit's doing, marriage is actually upheld and encouraged and supported, and you help one another in their marriages too, and their families, right? And so maybe that's the origin of something like a Christian day school, is actually like, this is hard for us to all do individually, so let's collaborate our resources together and support each other in raising our children, right? Both in God's word, but then also as good citizens and knowledgeable, right? So that's the Christian use. And again, one thing that's different between us and the Reform on this is that they have more of the idea that you take God's word and you apply it, so that you're the actor, you're the one doing the thing. You're like, okay, there's the fourth commandment, now I'm going to put it to good use. And you can do that. You can meditate on God's word. We would emphasize that God's word only has its effect because it comes through the power of the Holy Spirit. So it's actually the Holy Spirit who changes the mind and the heart to be more into these sort of things, to do these things. All right. But we always end up, even as you try to read God's word and apply it to your life, you always end up back with, well, but I don't do that. I fall short of that. And so this is confession and absolution is where this, which is why he gives the law primarily. But it has these other ways that it's used, applied in civil society and applied to the Christian in living a life. Okay, so that's your little review on the Ten Commandments, because I don't think we did that. We might have done that.
I don't think we did.
Okay. Well, as we were talking about, Dasha and Allie, too bad they can't be here, they were dynamically leading the conversation, which is fine. It's my preference, actually. Because the way I think about teaching, I don't know, is I don't come with here's the set curriculum that I have to cover, although I have that. But I think of the class as every time you teach the same material, you teach it differently because the class is different. Yeah. So the goal as a teacher maybe is to just have the resources available so that when the questions come in the direction of the class, that you have the ability to then teach towards that. All right. So we'll let this go where it goes, which is what we usually do. But we're going to go to the first article of the Creed. And see, at this point...
One of the reasons I just don't come is because I feel I talk too much.
No, I would go the other way.
Right.
My job here is not to talk too much. My job is to let you talk and
I told Pastor
listen.
on Friday night at the musical, I said, I feel like we were off the rails last week Sundays than we have in other, but I feel like I learned more last week Sunday than I have in any of the other ones.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and that's not going to always be the case.
Right.
Sometimes that conversation you'll just be like, I don't understand what these ladies are yapping about, and then you'll just, and you're just, okay, that's fine too, right? And maybe that's setting expectations in a realistic way, but this happens with preaching too. Sometimes the sermon is, for lack of a better way of describing it, kind of high and lofty, big ideas, and sometimes it's like today, it's going to be much more down to earth. Like, how does the Lord teach us to pray? And just kind of a simple instruction on that. So it really, it depends on the day and the context. And
So we should be studying the Lord's Prayer today instead of...
it would make sense. Although you can think of what we'll hear in church as being kind of a preparation then for when we study it. Because even with the basic sermon, the rest of the service is going to really unload all sorts of ideas on you, right? That maybe you haven't thought about, whether it's the hymnody or the readings. So there's always more to discuss than what we have time to do. We could spend all day talking if we want. All right, so first article. I generally don't teach it the way that it's structured, but it's structured according to the way it's revealed in the scriptures, if that makes sense. So the goal of maybe we should talk about what a creed is. We got to back up a little bit. Do you need this still? I can leave it up there.
No.
Okay. You see it? Zoom in, write it down. Okay. Pause. Pause your video. Well, I know Dasha was taking notes, so. All right. So the word creed comes from credo. Probably knew that in Latin. And I think usually in the hymnal it may even say credo. I don't know, maybe it doesn't anymore. A lot of the parts had the Latin names, but probably not the creed. And it comes from the Greek word, and you probably don't know this, logeo. That's probably it. I'm not going to write it in Greek. I'll write it in E. So you see two words there, homo and logeo. All right. So homo, because we use that in other contexts as a prefix. That means the same. Mm-hmm. And then logeo, like logos, logical uses that as a stem. It has to do with words, but this is the verb. This is saying. We'll just say saying or speaking. We could say speaking too. All right. I'm standing in the way of the camera. So creed, credo, means to could also just mean confess. It's sometimes translated that way. But it comes from this, homologeo, to say the same thing, to speak together. All right, so you've heard that like when I introduce like the Nicene Creed on Sunday, where we say, we confess together, we show love for one another, right? But it's together. We're saying the same words together. And I would actually argue that if you're not confident about those words, that you actually believe what the Creed says, then don't say them yet. Study them, and then, as you come to believe them, you can confess it. A famous story from a now deceased author. He was a Presbyterian pastor. His name's Eugene Peterson, but he talks about a man that was in his parish. He was a spouse. So Teresa came with his wife, sat in the pew for 20 years, never said anything, didn't speak anything, just listen. And then one day he just started saying the Creed. And so, you ask him, like, what changed? And he's like, I believe it now. And you're like, okay. Right? So, but it took a while of him hearing before he felt, comfortable or even just the Spirit, worked faith. Mm-hmm.
That you really accepted that as your belief.
I had that in my first parish where a man had been attending with his wife. He would go to Mass and she would go to Lutheran church, and he was there. And they would both go to each other's service together, and they go to 2 every Sunday. Actually, they came on Saturday night usually, I think. It doesn't matter. And he did that he was a 20-year as well. And then, after a while, he's like, Pastor, I think you've convinced me. And I'm like, okay. But it's hard, especially depending on your Roman Catholic family, because it tends to be very tribal, I guess. Or like, he was really concerned what Mom would think. He's Mama's boy. And Mom's attitude about it had changed when he was younger, when he married a non-Catholic, which was a problem at the time. The priest was very... I don't know if it was just Northwest Indiana, but I think it's probably true in other places. It was like, you don't marry outside Catholicism. And if you do, he was making them sign promises that the children would be raised Catholic before he would marry them.
That happened with my husband's cousins.
Okay.
Because his wife was Lutheran,
Mm-hmm.
and he was Catholic. And I think he had to sign something that the kids would be raised Catholic. And now one of the children turned Lutheran.
Uh-oh.
And it was after they both died. And
Oh, I see.
And the guy said his cousin said he felt really bad that he never attended church with his mom. Because he had to be Catholic.
Oh, I got you.
That's what Dad
Yeah, that was the promise. And it's actually a helpful story. I didn't plan on this, but for those priests at the time, and I don't think they do that anymore mostly, but for them it was important that not only that the children be raised Catholic, so there's important, for longevity of a congregation or parish, but that they would agree to the whole body of doctrine that the Roman Church taught. That was the emphasis there, that they would go through all the catechesis like we do, something similar. A more conservative Roman parish will have a 3-year program like we do with children, sometimes with adults too. And it's called RCIA, I think, right, for Christian Initiation of Adults. I don't know if you've heard of that. Anyway, doesn't matter. I've read the materials, which is fascinating because it's much more intense than what we do with adults. But for them, or for those priests, it was, you have to agree to everything. Now, in our church body, we don't. To become a member, or to consider yourself, part of the congregation officially, is to agree to this. So the 6 chief parts, which are, generally speaking, like, I guess kind of like the bare minimum is how you might look at it. This is what we teach children, like 10 commandments. But to the point, Roman Catholics, 10 commandments. They actually number them the same way. They don't necessarily believe the same thing about what they do, or how the Holy Spirit uses them. But we have that in common. They confess the Apostles' Creed. All right. Minor variation on the 3rd article, right? Instead of saying Christian church, they say Catholic church. But we can talk about that when we get to the 3rd article. Lord's Prayer, we have that in common. Baptism, we have the rite and words in common, but we actually believe a little bit differently about it, what it gives. but that's another conversation when we get to baptism.
The Lord's Prayer, they don't,
Oh, they don't have the long termination?
the end.
Yeah, the end is a liturgical addition. They will use it sometimes in some services. Right. What happened is that Lutherans said it all the time in church. Remember, we talked about this when we talked about worship, is that the people didn't say the words. They listened.
Right.
Because they didn't know it. It was in Latin. When it was put into the vernacular, in our case into German and then Scandinavian languages, the people were saying the words now. They were given the Lord's Prayer to say, which seems incredible that they weren't praying the Lord's Prayer, but they didn't. And so once they said it, and then they had that longer liturgical ending, which is what it is. Yeah, because it's not in the original text. They just end,
Right,
deliver us from evil, amen.
Yeah.
Right, that's how it's in the Bible.
Which, yeah.
Yeah, and then they have this longer ending that we add. And even in our catechism, you'll note there's the little asterisks, and then there's a note at the bottom. Luther's original question was, what is meant by the word amen? And so we even had to change the catechism from Luther, because Luther didn't have the longer ending either.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it just said amen. That's why all the answer is about amen, not about for thine is the kingdom power.
Okay.
That's quoting from Revelation, by the way, so
Yeah.
just as a note.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so we had that in common. Baptism, we use the same words, follow the same formula.
They are from the Catholic Church.
Right. I'm getting there. Getting ahead of me. Confession and absolution, both privately. They don't do corporately, but together as a body. But they do it privately. So do we. Office of the keys, binding and loosing of sins, same thing. We actually share that in common. Sacrament of the altar, we use the same words. Right now, so the word. Go ahead.
What I don't understand is they use the same words.
Mm-hmm.
Drink of it, all of you.
Yep.
But they don't do.
Not everybody drinks of it, depending on the parish. Yeah.
So then, how is that the Lord's Supper?
Oh, because because it's not complete.
Well, I mean,
We talked about this, didn't we? That they believe that
maybe you did.
the blood is in the body. This comes out of medieval speculation. Because if you're receiving the body, then you're receiving blood too, right?
No.
What?
If you aren't drinking it,
Well, can you ever drain all the blood from flesh? Like if you slaughter an animal and.
I mean, drink of it, all
All right.
of you.
Yeah, I know.
Well, anyway.
Remind me when we come to the Lord's Supper to talk about that again.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So the point being is that even if we have the same words, it doesn't necessarily mean we believe the same thing that those words teach. That's not talking about interpretation. It's just, although that's involved there. But it's all of the accessory teachings that come alongside the main thing. So we have the Ten Commandments, we have the words in common, but then what do we teach alongside that as to how those words are used or applied? That will differ. But the point being is that we will then say that we're Christians. I have to correct this all the time. I don't know what happened with some of the families in our congregation where they teach their kids that Roman Catholics aren't Christians. You're like, I don't know where you got that, but that's never been our confession. Not even when the Pope excommunicated Luther, we still said that there were true Christians in the Roman Church.
I think when I was in catechism class,
Mm-hmm.
that's in the 7th grade, and that's a couple years ago.
Yeah,
20 zillion years ago.
right. You heard that?
Mentioned that.
Okay.
The Pope was the
Mm-hmm.
Antichrist.
Well, that is our confession, but that doesn't mean that everyone in the Catholic Church is not a Christian. Even if the public teaching, even if we disagree with the Pope being the vicar of Christ.
Well, and somebody asked me once, it's like, we believe in the same God, don't we? And I'm like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As far as I know,
Yeah.
I mean.
Wow. So this is a problem, but it does connect really well to the creed, because while at the same time we'll recognize each other as being Christian, which I think most Roman Catholics do today, even priests, although for a while they didn't. But I think it was John Paul II, or maybe it was Benedict, who said Luther was wrong, but he shouldn't have been excommunicated. It's like, okay. Because it's a bigger tent now. They're not as... Anyway.
Right.
But the point being is that we can recognize where we have unanimity, where we agree, but still maintain our distinctions as well, that's always been true for the Christian Church. It's not just Roman Catholics and Lutherans. The Alexandrians, the Antioch, Alexandria, Rome, they didn't agree in the first century with each other. So different, depending on where they were, what their pagan background was, what kind of things they were coming out of into Christianity, whether they had been Jews or if they were Gentiles that became Christian. And then local kind of just customs, they didn't agree. But they would get together pretty frequently in council then to discuss if there was a major error that was pervading the church, all the congregations that they recognized was a common error. Then we get together to work out how do we respond to this together. Even though we're not necessarily all, we recognize we don't actually confess things exactly the same way, right? We still recognize each other as part of the same body of Christ. This is hard for kids because they're like, well, wait a minute. This came up in chapel this week. It's like, is this church the only church? And I'm like, I would prefer we call what we have here a parish or a congregation of the whole body, which is the body of Christ, of the Christian church on earth. All right, so that would be my preference. We can distinguish that and say, we're just a part of the whole here, right? And then, interestingly enough, there's people probably, at least if we're going to take God's word seriously, there's people that are a part of this congregation that aren't part of the body of Christ. They actually don't believe, but they just kind of either attend or they've associated their name with the church. Especially if they don't attend and they've associated the name, they don't want to come. And you're like, well then, why don't you just say you're not part of this? Well, they don't want to say they're not part of the body of Christ, but they don't want to connect to a congregation. Right, so that's kind of hard because that's where God promises to give them his word. Sorry if this is confusing. Make sure. I see Teresa looks like I'm losing her.
Pretty elaborate.
Well, but at the same time, there are, I guess the point is even if you're in a congregation that's confused about maybe what some or a lot of the scripture says, that doesn't mean that the Holy Spirit doesn't work through that and give faith. And you can be yet a Christian even in a congregation that itself is ostensibly not even. That's Luther's argument to say that even in those congregations that went so far astray from what God's word teaches, yet in their practice of prayer, they still prayed according to God's word. So God's word was being preserved, and true Christians were still found, even when the priest was teaching falsely, or the Pope was giving decrees that were against God's word, or something like that. There were still Christians in the congregation, of course, because the word was still there. So the question is then, how much same saying or same speaking can you really expect, right? How much unanimity, or unanimous voice. And so for the church, generally speaking, the creeds are the answer to that. All right. Although that isn't to say they didn't argue about them. But in the case of this creed, which we just call the creed, it's generally we call it the Apostles' Creed. And not because it was written by the apostles, which is confusing, or it came from the apostles, but that because it teaches the doctrine of the apostles. So when you read the New Testament and you read the creed, the consensus of the church since the 3rd century at least, or 2nd century, is this says what the Bible says about God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Does that make sense? So that we're saying the same thing as the Bible's saying. And then by giving this creed, is the creed for the baptized, by the way. So when you're baptized, you get the Apostles' Creed for your daily creed. And then we say the creed together as well, because not only is it saying the same thing as the Bible, but because we're all Christians together, then we can say it together. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Same saying, same speaking. That might sound a little cultic. Everybody say the words together, monotone, right? And maybe it probably does sound that way actually on Sunday. I don't know. When you listen to us confessing things together, there's a rhythm and a pattern that just kind of we have to fall into so that last Sunday somebody was way ahead of the rest of us.
There was a teacher here that
says it faster.
Had to say it faster than the rest of us.
Oh yeah.
Like, when we were in choir, we were taught, you have to do it together.
Right.
And she just
always
had to say it faster.
Probably once a week I have to tell the teachers to slow down in class. Because we have 8th graders that could get through it pretty quick, but we also have little people that are still, even have a hard time articulating words that quickly.
Well,
because they're still making sounds. Yeah.
Your morning prayer.
Yeah.
You go real fast, because I tried saying it with you a couple times, and it's like, okay.
Well, I can't go slower because I don't even know. I don't hear you. So you can't really...
I understand that. It's just
Yeah.
that, as far as the pace.
Oh, well, that's helpful. Maybe I should go slower.
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
Just,
But yeah, you don't know the pace until you hear, and it's based on the room too. And like if you're in a small room like this, but has some reverberation, which I think is unfortunate. It's a little too echoey in here for me. But you have to go slower then, or especially in church, because otherwise the words all get jumbled on top of each other. Yeah. So the pacing and the timing that's the reason why the recorded organ doesn't work as well as when we have someone playing, in part, because Ethan plays based off of what he hears.
yes.
But not only what he's hearing from the congregation, but how it's sounding in the room. Whereas the recording doesn't care, it just keeps going. It's like, it doesn't care that you're not keeping up, or that it sounds all jumbled in the room or whatever.
Yes, there's a few hymns that I think that recording goes
I've
so
thought,
fast. It's like,
I can't really slow it down without it sounding kind of robotic, with like when you listen to pop music. So, all right, so that's Creed. That's probably good enough for now. We'll have to review it again for Allie and whatnot, and Dasha. And Marla, I don't know, she's camping again, maybe? I didn't hear from her. She left her car here, so I don't know, they must have just taken off after the play. All right, so first article. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. So there's quite a bit to be said there, right? God, what is God? Do you have a basic definition when somebody says, what is God or a God? Supreme being, yeah, that's a lot of people say. Ruler of all things, yeah. For some, I think it's probably, that which gives us meaning or sense of purpose, like there's theories about the creation generally by non-Christians, but they talk about what they call God being like the watchmaker, the one who set things in order and put things in place and got things into motion. Which actually we don't disagree with that part of, but that's not just all who God is.
But he still preserves.
Because he still preserves, yeah. Yeah. So they have kind of like a disconnected God, but at least there's a first, what do you want to say? An origin or a first mover is the language the philosophers use. The one who somebody had to start it. Even the Big Bang, something or someone had to cause it to bang. After that, he can walk away, but yeah. So even the evolutionists will suggest that there's got to be, at least the honest ones, I think. Right. We would define God, I would say, according to the first commandment. It's anyone or anything that we put our fear, love, and trust in. So that could be negative. It could be the wrong God. Like we fear, I don't know, fear the government or something. That which we love, it could be money. Money can become a god. Jesus will warn us about that a couple times this summer. Trust, you can put trust in material things is probably the thing we put a lot of trust in, right?
Or money.
Yeah, and money again. Yeah, money's kind of common.
We can do what we want.
Mm-hmm. But we can even trust in like our health. Like I'm gonna, and then when Barb knows, you get older, things like, no, I can't really trust that my body's gonna work tomorrow.
You're right.
Yeah, no. Fear, love, and trust in God above all things is the first commandment. So I would suggest that's the best definition. But here in the first article, it does something interesting. It says the Father Almighty. And with a few exceptions, for the most part, the Old Testament doesn't call God Father. There's a couple exceptions to that in the prophets, but for the most part, he's never called Father. He's called the Lord, or if you prefer Hebrew, Yahweh. That's not really Hebrew, but okay. He's called God. He's called, I'm trying to think of some other ones. Maybe some of the attributal names, like the Almighty. Yeah.
I am.
Oh, I am. Yeah, the divine name. So, yeah, you have that, but you don't have Father. And so right away in the Creed, if you were a new Christian, especially if you were coming from paganism and your God was maybe not even a person, maybe like the Mother Earth or something. Or even then, it's Mother Earth. That doesn't work. Gaia, I guess. To have the idea that you would call God Father is already introducing an idea that would be a little strange, actually. I suppose maybe not for Norse people, because they had Odin is the All-Father. So they call the All-Father. But anyway, And by saying he's Father, then we're already presuming that he has...
Authority?
That's true. Good.
Children?
Children, yeah. Or in particular in the Creed, a son, right? And in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord.
Oh,
Right?
you're right. Okay.
Yeah. So the important point here is that the Creed opens up with a statement that almost expects you to have already heard of Jesus Christ. Otherwise, you don't like, well, wait a minute, he's a father of who? Sometimes people get confused about this, and they say that God as Father means he's created me. And there is a truth in that, because you've been reborn by water and the Word. And even God knit you together in your mother's womb. But he's not your father by making you. He's your creator. He's your father by adoption, right? The Bible talks that way about baptism, yeah, as adoption. Or being reborn by water and the Word, or by the Spirit and the Word, or water, depending on which text you want to read. Which is likened to adoption, or it's likened to new birth, right? So, I'm not trying to confuse too much, but when you think of God as creator, that's not analogous to Father, would be my assertion. It's different. To call him Father is already now going to presume that you're going to be reborn, you're going to be given, or being adopted later. And that doesn't come till the end of the second article and then into the third article. So right away in the first article, they're already you're anticipating the work of the Son and the Spirit who's coming, just with that word Father. Okay, that's a heady idea. It's not a simple idea, but it's there. Almighty, that he has all power, I guess, right? Might is power. And I don't, Barb, when you went through the catechism, you probably covered all sorts of other all words, right? All-knowing. Oh, they were omni, right? You learned, they learned Latin words.
Omnipresent, omni everything.
Yeah, so omni meaning all. So omniscient is mind. Omnipotent is power. Potent is power.
Omnipresent.
Omnipresent is present everywhere. I don't know. Other attributes of God and his divinity, right? Now, I say that because then with Jesus, he bears all those same attributes. He's all powerful, all knowing.
Well, he's God.
Except not always.
Well,
He says, like regarding the last day, Jesus says no one knows the day or the hour except for the Father. So even the Father hasn't revealed that to his Son.
You should just separate them. They're different gods.
Right. Well, and this is important when we talk about the creed, is that as we say in the Athanasian Creed, we'll do that in a few weeks, which is the third of the creeds that all of our churches share in common. So Apostles is the daily prayer, or the daily creed. Nicene Creed is generally associated with the Lord's Supper. So for us, that's every Sunday. And then, although that's the tradition, it's not necessary, but I follow the tradition on that. Some churches will do the Apostles with the Lord's Supper as well. But that's why the Nicene's listed first and the Apostles second, is to indicate that preference traditionally. All right, anyway. And then the third is called the Athanasian Creed. It's named after Athanasius, but it was written after he died. But it is actually the response of some errors in the church, and a bunch of the pastors from all over and all these different congregations and different church bodies got together into a council. It's called an ecumenical council, meaning it's of the whole, of all the people, and then they wrote together over the span of, I don't know, probably 30 or 50 years, that creed. Kept working out new drafts, we want to get all the words just right. There's one word in particular that they still argue about, especially between the churches of the West, which we belong to, or the churches of the East. But actually 2 points in the creed there. But in the Athanasian Creed, now I can't remember what I was going to point out in that creed.
That it distinguishes.
Ah, yes, not confusing the persons, but it's not confusing. Not confusing the substance, but distinguishing the persons. We're going to chant it this year just for fun of it, since I have an organist.
Really?
We usually say it responsively. We're going to try to sing it responsively. There's almost no way, because it's so long. It's like a whole page in the hymnal. We have to sit down for it. It's too long. There's almost no way to make it interesting for people. So, but anyway, that's another story. That's a different creed. That's a longer creed. It almost defeats the purpose of the creed when it's that long, because the idea is this is something that I can memorize, hopefully, commit to memory that will be readily at hand when someone says, well, who is Jesus? And you can say, he's God the Father's only Son. He's my Lord. He's redeemed me by his body, by not with gold or silver, with his innocent suffering and death, with his precious blood. You have these things at hand. That's the purpose of the creed. Even a child then can just say, here's what I believe. Even if you don't necessarily have Bible verses to quote, right, is to prove it, at least then you can say, here's what I believe, right?
Have you memorized the Athanasian Creed?
No. No. I mean, large chunks of it. One of the things I did in Indiana, my last parish, 2 parishes ago, if you count the interim, is because of the frustration people had, we said it 4 times a year. Not just on Trinity Sunday, but 3 other times a year. And then people became much more familiar with it, and it wasn't nearly as difficult because you just said it more often. And you're like, it's not that long. I mean, it takes a couple more minutes, but. And then things people say, well, what did Pat, in Bible study afterwards, what did we mean by that phrase? But you can't really, if you're not familiar with it, then you don't start to ask questions about it, right?
Right.
Yeah. By the way, since I mentioned memorization, the reason for a creed, which we should have done, I already erased it, is especially until the Reformation, pretty much, people didn't have Bibles to read. The printing press was invented 100 years before the Reformation, so what is that, 15th century? Late 15th, and it wasn't really popular until the 16th century, widely used. And the printers, they had printers in every town by that point, and they were desperate to print stuff because it was big money, right? But people still couldn't read necessarily, so it was a lot of picture books. They would do woodcuts, and then, they had movable type, which was Gutenberg, but they would also still do, like the Catechism had corresponding woodcuts when they gave it to children. So they'd have the words, but not all the kids could read. Most of them couldn't, so then they'd have a picture to illustrate it. So it was an illustrated catechism. We still have those, and there's so many. They printed so many of those illustrations that you can find them all over Germany, even today in museums, that they're all available. There's one set that isn't available that I still can't find. Somebody, I'm sure it has to be in somebody's barn or something, but I made large format posters for each part of the creed. We've tried to replicate what we think they were. CPH has a set you can buy, other people do, that you could put in the home, that poster, poster size. All right, so, but the point is that, why did you need pictures? Because you couldn't read. So I think we talked about our churches were unique in that, is that we started parish schools. So there wasn't public education. That didn't happen until the late, 19th century in America. We inherited that from Germany and the Prussian Union. So we brought some of the worst parts of the Prussian Union to the United States, but for the most part, it was the church that ran a school for the community, and it was a charitable venture. Of course, generally speaking, there was only one congregation per town, generally. Not until another couple hundred years would there be like 2 churches in the same town that were competing with each other. Because whatever the mayor or the prince believed, then everybody else believed that, so yeah. But there was be a school, and it was a Latin school, so it taught the kids Latin so that they could pray in church, but then they could also read, and both boys and girls too, which was unique. That hadn't been done before. You had to be basically a nobleman's daughter to do any kind of learning. And even then, not really till the 20th century, in the secular world, were there opportunities for women for higher learning. It's a whole other story. But our schools were teaching the kids to read so that they could read the Bible. That was the point. But before that, especially children, but really adults too, for the most part, because tradespeople or whatever would have limited knowledge of this. They had limited need to be able to read. Maybe accounting, so numbers, but not necessarily words. And so teaching them something out loud that they could then speak out loud, and doing that consistently and regularly was a way then to say, okay, even if you don't know and you can't quote a lot of Bible verses and you haven't read the whole book, of Matthew or something, do you know the 10 Commandments? Do you know the Creed? Do you know the prayer? Do you know what baptism is? Do you know what the Lord's Supper is? You know what confession is? Okay. So you have that kind of Here's what's necessary to know. It's really to call yourself a Christian, is what we would argue. And that's what the creed functions as, especially in an illiterate society, which is a key there.
Yeah.
Now, if you're literate, the presumption is that if you read the Bible, you're going to end up saying the creed anyway.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, that's the presumption. I've never put it to the test. Not given someone the creed and then just gave them a Bible and see if they came up with the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so God the Father Almighty, and then maker or creator of heaven and earth. All right, so heaven can mean any number of things. It can mean the sky. It can mean the stars and planets. Or it can mean the place or whatever existence God dwells in. So heaven is distinct from earth, creaturely existence. But if he's present everywhere, as you said, then heaven is here too, but not by sight. You know what I mean? Now we're talking metaphysical stuff and
not without sin.
yeah, and that's about as far as we can go. So when we say we're going to die to be with the Lord in heaven, it just means wherever he is, which is actually everywhere. So that's interesting. Thought to kind of get your head around. So then Luther's explanation is pretty straightforward. And notice it's just I believe. By the way, the creed originally was we believe, but which makes sense if you're confessing it together, homologeo. But we changed it to I. I think that makes sense. It is a personal confession of faith as much as it's a corporate one. But I believe that God has made me and all creatures, so there's nothing made which God did not make, and that he has given me my body and soul, eyes, ears, and all my members, my reason and all my senses, and then to your point, Barb, still takes care of them. So he's not just a watchmaker, but he's the one that keeps it all going, causes the rain to fall, the sun to shine, the seed to sprout. I'm just quoting the Old Testament here. He knits you together in your mother's womb. There's no conception of a child apart from God's doing, despite everything that we seem to think we can do to control conception. It's only by God's giving. That's our confession theologically. And notice everything that's involved there. These categories are interesting. They do echo the New Testament in particular, but Luther is not so interested in philosophy. He's more interested in confessing that there is no aspect of you that wasn't given to you by God. So however you want to bifurcate yourself up into parts, do you think of yourself in different parts? Obviously your fingers, toes, and that sort of thing, right? But there's my soul, and then there's my spirit. I don't know how my soul and spirit differ. And then my body, or there's what was another one? My heart, because when we talk about the heart, there's the thing that beats the muscle, right? But then we also talk about it being like the seat of faith. However you want to break it down, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
Except the point is that God gives it and takes care of it. Okay, so that's important. Yeah, then that's what he means by creator. And then this is to give us this day our daily bread? We haven't gotten to the Lord's Prayer yet, sorry. He's anticipating a little bit. He gives me clothing and shoes, food and drink, house and home, wife and children, land, animals, and all I have. So not just everything that is me, but everything that belongs to me too is a gift from God, which is beautiful as well. I always ask the children though, then why don't you ask for a Lambo? And they're like, what's a Lambo? I'm like, a Lamborghini. And they're like, what? Why would I want one of those? I'm like, I don't know. People want those things for some reason. It's like a $5,000 oil change. I don't know why you would want one, but okay. Well, it's on the scale of long-term maintenance and cost. Probably not all that different from a Lambo. They last longer. They don't rust out as easy. Anyway, yeah. So everything, right? And notice the things that Luther lists are not superfluous. They're not. What do you want to say?
Things we don't need.
Luxury. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, that's why the Lambo is excluded. Yeah, none of these we would consider luxuries. I mean, I suppose you can go without shoes. My kids hardly ever wear shoes, even when they go out in public, but they're weird that way. We make them wear shoes. Well, it is good for your posture and for your toes and all that kind of stuff. Well, and you can buy shoes that have little fingers, the Vibram, the 5 fingers. that they have no sole. It's basically just a way to protect your feet, but it's like a rubber slipper.
Yeah, it's like a river sock.
A rubber sock, but with fingers too, so your toes can flex. So it's like wearing no shoes, but it's, yeah. And there's also anyway, you don't need to know this. But shoes, you think clothing, God gave that to Adam and Eve right away after their sin, right? Yeah. Shoes, you see Jesus taking off sandals and feet. So he's careful about feet. Food and drink, that's obvious promise from God. You want to use the wilderness wandering for that? Here's manna and water, right? House and home. House and home are different. So house is dwelling. So that could be a tent. It doesn't have to be, solid walls and that kind of thing. Or it can be a thatched roof. It could be clay. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that God has provided homes, or houses, I should say. Home is different. That's the family. And within the family, then his wife and children. So this is addressed to fathers, clearly, but then fathers to children and to sons, but also sons and daughters. So if you want to substitute in husband and children, fine. Or spouse, yeah, that's fine. Land, animals, and all I have. So you note that for Luther, I think Luther's reflecting on the Old Testament, that God's people have almost always been agrarian, meaning they're farmer type. Shepherds, right? You have that. Also nomadic. And it's when they settle that they start to mimic places like the children of Cain or Babel, right? Or Jericho, right? When they settle into city. You're probably not city people, are you? Because you live here, right? Okay. Are you offended by the city? Does it make you uncomfortable? Okay, all right. It does for me. I've lived in Chicago, and that was enough. More than once. The first time I said, I'm never going to live there again. And then we did again. But it's fun when you're young and you don't have kids and everything, but especially now it's not even safe. But it's like these things always devolve. That's kind of the point. But anyway, Luther has that in mind. Land and animals are good gifts from God.
That is the basis of our life. I mean, we need land and animals.
Well, yeah, because we want food and drink.
Because we aren't going to live.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Without them.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's what we need, not what we
And Luther's not presuming that everybody has the same gift and in the same quantity, because the Bible doesn't either. Everybody's given to differently. But he still, whatever you receive, he wants you to think in terms of contentment. So he says, he richly and daily provides me with all that I need to support this body and life. It doesn't always seem that way, but in this explanation, I think Luther rightly, from the scriptures, trying to encourage you to think of, like, whatever God has given me, it's for my good and it's what I need. Even if it's not exactly what I think I need or what I want, or I would rather not go through an economic collapse and, whatever we're experiencing. For whatever reason, God wants that for us now. Maybe to repent us of trusting in constant economic growth, which is, I think it's a little deceiving, but that's what we had. All right, so it may be hard, but we want to remember that God has promised to always take care of us. What that looks like can be different. A friend of mine was in Madagascar. The largest Lutheran church in the world is in Madagascar. If you didn't know that. Yeah. I mean, Christianity is based in Africa today, for all intents and purposes. More Christians in Africa than anywhere else. Africa's a big continent. And after the Malagasy church, the next largest is Kenya, maybe? We're way down. You have to put all the Lutherans together in America to even get close to the number of Lutherans that are there. Yeah. But anyway, he was walking, and there was a woman working in a field, and she was carrying a child on the front and back, and there were children helping her, older children helping her. And he just told the story, and it was profound that I won't forget it. They said that she turned and she looked at us walking. They were wearing pastor garb, and she smiled at us. And we looked, and his thought was how are you smiling when you're doing this hard labor and you've got she's carrying a child on the front and back, and she's working hard, and yet she's content, and apparently there was true joy on her face, to see the pastor and this kind of thing. Very strange, right? It's well, how can you be content with that life? Probably not living in a home that we would, maybe no running water, that kind of thing either. Yeah.
My sister-in-law had her last son. They were missionaries in Africa.
Yeah.
In Liberia, and the women went out to the rice field, and you carried your baby on your back, right?
Yeah.
And he got so sunburned because he was
Oh, right.
And he still has scars from when
So that's like what? What is that? 3rd degree, 4th degree?
she
Whatever kind of burn,
did
right?
what the women did to be accepted so that they could
Oh.
believe the message they would bring.
But you don't have the melanin for that or whatever.
Well,
Yeah.
and I don't think she realized that. I mean, it was young, she was young, and they were beginning their ministry. And,
Yeah, that's regret there. Yeah.
but, you know, he's a pastor now and
Mhm. Yeah.
also. So,
And what scars? We all have scars. I mean, doesn't say they don't hurt. So we can pick up there because when we talk about Jesus, we'll have to, and just out of necessity, return to the Father. You can't talk about having a son unless without a father.
and not his father.
Yeah. So the other ladies can join us then, and we'll get back to it. All good? All right. Thank you. It's not quite as dynamic